Hello and welcome to the Plan to Peak Health and Human Performance video blog. The subject I'll be talking about today is the blog article that I wrote regarding building an aerobic power base. For an endurance sports athlete, the aerobic power base is the foundation to all of the efforts that we're going to be putting in, and that's why this topic is an important one. It is the system that takes the longest to develop and the most important. So let's get into it. So let's first understand what aerobic metabolism is. So aerobic basically means with oxygen. And the system that we're talking about and the energy that's produced takes place in the mitochondria of our cells. And what we're looking at is the citric acid cycle, or what's also referred to as the Krebs cycle, named after the person who discovered it, Hans Krebs. And it generates energy very efficiently. In fact, the aerobic metabolism of fatty acids is 3 times more efficient than anaerobic metabolism. So when we're taking a molecule of glucose, for instance, we're going to be able to create about 32 to 34 ATP molecules, and the ATP is the true currency of our bodies, versus 106 molecules of ATP when we burn a molecule of fat. And the other thing that happens when you're metabolizing glucose is you have production of lactate and reactive oxygen species and other things. So it's much more conducive for us to produce energy through our fat metabolism. I often tell athletes when you're burning fat, fast is easy. And we'll get into that a little bit. So when you're thinking about your aerobic base, a lot of people think about your endurance capacity. So how long you can ride, and that is part of it. So there is a duration element to the aerobic physiology, but it's important to also understand that it's you want that level, the power output, while you are still aerobic, while you're still burning fat predominantly, while you still feel like it's easy, to be as high as possible. Because it's the athletes that have the ability to ride at 250 watts when it's still aerobic and feeling easy, that have the advantage over the athlete that, say, starts to feel the effort becoming moderately intense at lower wattages, like 220, say. This athlete doesn't feel like it's easy because they're starting to use more glucose, and and all of the byproducts that come with it have to be dealt with. And this is in large part why time is limited above this aerobic threshold. So the role of aerobic energy metabolism is our primary energy source for endurance sports. So when you think about cycling, anything over a couple minutes is still predominantly aerobic. That is where the energy is coming from. It's also the role of the aerobic system to help us recover from efforts above the anaerobic system or above the aerobic threshold. So when you're doing anaerobic efforts, we have to rely on our aerobic system to help us recover from that. So a strong aerobic system, which can burn predominantly fat, will spare glycogen. So, there's all this talk about carb loading and consuming large amounts of glucose. If you have a great aerobic system, you are sparing glycogen depletion because you're not burning glycogen and glucose at high rates, because you're depending on your aerobic system to do that. So this is a conservation mechanism, and it's really important to understand that, because relying on your anaerobic energy system has limited durations. So again, when we're talking about the aerobic system, we have to think about the duration that you can ride at in this aerobic zone, but also how hard it is. So when you're working on the aerobic system, you want to stress the aerobic system. So you want to be riding in zones. You may have heard of heart rate zone 2 training, being able to pass the talk test. When you're thinking about lactate levels, this is 2 millimoles or below, or right around what's called obla, or onset of blood lactate accumulation. So stimulating the stress in that area is a great way to stimulate the aerobic metabolism to adapt to the load. I highly recommend using power meters and heart rate. Power meter is going to get the work measurement, and heart rate's the response to that work, and it brings some context to the effort. So I think it's really important to use both of those, since we do have that luxury as cyclists. And you have to also consider the frequency, making sure that the intensity is not too high, and also that the duration is going to cause the adaptation. Not spending enough time or riding too hard or too easy really has a limit to the benefit that you're going to get from your training. So when you're working your aerobic system and you're using these aerobic workouts to try and stimulate this metabolism, you really have to be cognizant of dehydration, poor air circulation, electrolyte imbalances. So I highly recommend you review the articles that I've written on this, the indoor training, the hydration and electrolyte status, because by not doing those things properly, you could actually be adding a different stressor to your workout, and it could be one that's not necessarily beneficial to the development of that energy system that you're working on. You may see that your heart rate's starting to drift because you weren't hydrating properly, or you had poor air circulation. And it's just that your core temperature is going up, not necessarily that the aerobic system has been challenged. So understanding how to optimize these things while you're challenging the aerobic system will really help you not waste a lot of time. So, when you're thinking about any energy system or any aspect of training, you need to challenge yourself. There's a concept of hormesis, or the ability to have enough stress to cause a positive adaptation. Now, that also means that you have to have the proper amount of recovery, but making sure that you're not making a toxic dose is important to any training variable or any training aspect that you're trying to work on. So being able to find the edge, know where your base ends, and challenge that by riding just a little bit more than you did the last time on your long ride, and not every ride, but at least one a week where you're doing that, will help you to challenge that system enough to create the adaptation that you're looking for. So that last point there about developed athletes, the more you've been riding, and I do mean not only miles, but I mean years of riding, usually the more developed you are, and the more training stress you can handle. So this is a big part of what fitness is the ability to be resilient to environmental, physiologic, and psychological stressors. So understanding these concepts of hormesis and enough load to cause an adaptation, enough recovery to allow you to recover and allow the adaptation are really important concepts in training. So when you know it's time to move on, and move into what we consider build phase, or a little bit more intense race readiness, well, first of all, you have to take a look at the events that you're trying to challenge yourself with. If you're racing 45 miles and it's going to take you about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you want an aerobic base that can handle that type of an effort and still be aerobic. If you start to have heart rate drift and fatigue at the 2-hour mark, and you're racing for 45 miles, and at the 2-hour mark, when the anaerobic efforts people start attacking, and your aerobic system has already been challenged, it will not support, hence base or foundation. That's why they call it that. It will not be able to support those efforts. So making sure that you're matching your aerobic base with how long you're expecting to perform well is a real important part of this. I recommend for people that are interested in a little bit more detail to read that blog post on our website. I'm available for coaching consults by the hour. I create custom training plans for athletes, and obviously our high performance premium service of monthly coaching where we develop a relationship with the athletes is also available. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you found this useful.